Over the past couple of years, if you follow my work, you would see that the majority of it has been filmed on either Red or Arri.
Like, ride with me if you ride with me, you can slide with me if you feel like 550 on the 5 sticky, come get high with me, that's a deal, right? Ride with me if you ride with me.
And previously to that, when I started out, I did so on the Canon 550D. Over the past couple of years, I've been paying very careful attention to the insane technology that has been slammed into these new age cinema cameras. And although they don't record RAW internally like the Red does, they have many other features that the Red just doesn't have. Things like IBIS, ridiculous low light capabilities, dynamic range similar to that of the more very expensive cinema cameras, and of course the big one for me, autofocus. So when Sony reached out to me in December of 2022 to test out the FX3, I was super pumped. This is currently being recorded on the FX3 with audio being directly recorded into the camera's handle, into the XLR input. In the past, when I would have to record similar links, I would have to get an external recorder, monitor that separately, and slap it together in post. Now, it's not impossible to do, obviously, it's just easier to do it this way, especially with such great sounding audio. And number two, I don't have to worry about the autofocus tripping up on me. In the past, when I would record with my Red, I would have to get an object, like a chair, place it in the position where I'd be standing, go to the camera, manually focus it, hit record, run back to the standing position, remove the chair, and just hope that my calculations were correct. So this is a new, very pleasant experience for me. When I received the camera, I decided that I wanted to put the camera into real world environments, actual productions where the clients would be paying for the work. I'd heard and read that this camera boasts 15 plus stops of dynamic range. That's in the ballpark of these super expensive cinema cameras. So the first thing that I noticed, and I was kind of looking out for it, was its dynamic range. As soon as I turned on the camera and looked into the monitor, the amount of detail that I could see from the shadows to the highlights really took me aback. Dynamic range is essentially how much detail or information the camera can capture from the depths of the shadows to the peaks of the highlights. So obviously, the higher the dynamic range, the better. And if you're shooting an S-Log3 at the base ISO of 800 and you adjust your exposure around that with an ND filter, that is when you're going to see this in action.
You kept it coming like a fast car. Got me sinking.
For this shot, I'm shooting inside of the vehicle of the artist, and it's around lunchtime, so the sun is really high, it's super bright outside, and even though the artist's face is being lit, the darker details of the interior that aren't being lit are still rich with detail.
No, you were like no one knows.
Here's another example. We are driving under a bridge, from the darkness into the direct sunlight, and the whole time, the detail right from the low to the high end holds. Here's a tip from me to you. Assign a custom button on your FX3 to display and remove the gamma assist function. This will allow you to remove the internal LUT so that you can preview the S-Log3 footage, what the camera is actually recording. Because you must remember, what you see on the monitor is just a Rec 709 image of what it's going to look like in Rec 709. Sometimes the internal LUT can throw you off and give you the impression that your highlights are clipping or your shadows are being crushed, when in fact they're actually not. The way I see it, as long as you can see the detail in the actual log footage, you can bring out that detail in post. I'm literally always switching between gamma assist on, gamma assist off, all the time.
In the crib on top of the hills.
Next, the weight of this thing. It is light. It's super light. It's like a paperweight in comparison to what I'm used to. While this is incredible because it's going to save my back and allow me to film for much longer, both handheld and on a gimbal, on the other hand, I kind of rely on the weights of a heavier camera like a Red or an Arri because the weight softens the movement of the camera. It removes those micro jitters and almost gives your footage a breath-like feeling to it. I I was obviously super psyched to try out the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, but I was still nervous that it wasn't going to be enough for my giraffe or donkey-like movement, so I ended up weighting down the camera with a dovetail and a weight. Weighting it down for me in combination with IBIS just set to standard is where it's at for me. Now the big one for me, autofocus. In the past, if I wanted to bring movement to the Red camera, I would have to hire a Steadicam operator, a focus puller to keep my focus. Or if the budget didn't allow, I would just put the system onto a gimbal without a focus puller. And I'd do the trick of measuring out the distance of camera at its furthest point and its nearest point from the subjects, getting the focus in between those 2 points. And then when tracking inward and outward with the gimbal, you kind of trick the viewer into thinking it's all in focus when it's actually just not. I was just excited that I wouldn't have to do that anymore.
Looking in the mirror and I imagine walk in the light.
After watching countless videos online about the camera's tech-sharp capabilities, my hopes were high. And let me just say, I wasn't disappointed.
Yeah.
For the majority of shots that I've done with the camera thus far, I'd say 95% of them have been shot with the focus area set to wide, with face priority enabled. And in some cases, like here, I had a car rig attached to the bonnet of the car. And because I knew that the artist or the subject wasn't going to be moving around, I set the focus mode to spot and placed the focus over the area or portion of the frame where he would be. In this way, you can be sure that the focus will never be lost because the camera will hold focus on the area specified.
Don't you know you are like no one knows?
Then last but not least, I wanted to talk about this camera's low light ability. I've always been super intrigued by this element ever since the days of the Sony A7S Mark II, where people were saying this camera can see into the dark. That really caught my attention. I obviously never used the camera myself, but I watched the videos online just like you and was blown away. So if you don't already know, the FX3 has a dual base ISO, meaning that you get the cleanest image with the most dynamic range in both lit situations where you would use the lower base ISO of 800 and in dark situations with its alternative higher base ISO of 12,800. So if you just stick to one of those base ISOs and set your exposure around that, then you know you are getting the best image possible from the camera. And let me tell you, what they say about this higher end ISO, it's true. The image is crystal clear, bringing out visuals with more light than even your eye can see. And also, just keep in mind that I was filming super slow motion at 100 frames per second, meaning that my shutter speed was 1/200th of a second. So essentially, if I drop my shutter to 1/50th of a second, if I was, say, filming 25 frames a second, it would have been even brighter than what you're seeing. I'm going to be releasing a video very soon where I go into more detail about getting the best out of low light situations where you'd be using that high base ISO of 12,800. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see that video and any future videos from me, please help me out and just like this video, subscribe to the channel.